The wagon lurched to a stop, and Evelyn Mercer felt the jolt travel through her spine like a final punctuation mark on everything that had brought her here. She didn't move right away. Through the gap in the canvas cover, she could see a landscape so bleak it looked like something scraped raw. Endless white, interrupted only by skeletal trees and a cabin that leaned slightly to one side, as if it had given up on standing straight years ago. "This is it," the driver said. His voice carried no particular emotion. He delivered packages with more ceremony. Evelyn climbed down without help. Her dress, the best one she owned, which wasn't saying much, caught on a nail and tore. She didn't bother fixing it. What was the point? She was standing in front of a stranger's failing ranch, about to marry a man whose face she'd seen exactly once, in a photograph so faded she wasn't entirely sure she'd recognize him. The cold hit her like a physical thing. Back in Ohio, winter meant frost on windows and extra quilts. Here, it meant something else entirely. The wind didn't just blow, it searched for weaknesses, found them, exploited them. Within seconds, her fingers went numb inside her thin gloves. "You the mail order?" A voice came from the direction of the cabin. Evelyn turned. The man walking toward her matched the photograph in the broadest sense. Tall, dark-haired, somewhere in his 30s. But the picture hadn't captured the exhaustion carved into every line of his face, or the way he moved like someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to not hurt. "Evelyn Mercer," she said, because her name was the only thing she still owned outright. "Caleb Harrow." He stopped a few feet away, studying her the way you'd study a horse at auction, assessing value, calculating risk. His expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe. Or just resignation. "You're smaller than I expected," he said finally. "You're broker than I expected." The words came out before she could stop them. The driver coughed to hide a laugh. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Hard to argue with the obvious. The ranch looked like it was held together by spite and increasingly ineffective prayers. Fences sagged. The barn door hung at an angle. Even the snow looked dirty. "Driver needs paying," Caleb said. "I assumed you'd handle that." "With what?" Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out the small cloth purse she'd hidden from her father. 3 months of washing other people's laundry, saved coin by coin. She counted out the fare and handed it over. The driver tipped his hat and left without another word, the wagon disappearing down the rutted path until even the sound of it faded into the endless white silence. Then it was just the two of them, standing in the cold like strangers at a funeral. "You should have stayed in Ohio," Caleb said. "I didn't have that option." "Everyone has options. Not daughters." She picked up her bag. Everything she owned fit in one worn carpet bag, and started toward the cabin. "Are we getting married today, or do you need more time to reconsider your poor life choices?" She heard him following. "Reverend's coming tomorrow. Today you can settle in." "Settle in where exactly?" He pushed past her and opened the cabin door. The hinges screamed. Inside was worse than outside, which Evelyn hadn't thought possible. One room, dirt floor, a stove that looked like it predated statehood, furniture that might have been nice once, in some previous decade, before hard use and harder weather beat it into submission. "I'll sleep in the barn," Caleb said, "until after tomorrow." How chivalrous. Evelyn set her bag on the table, which wobbled. Everything in this place wobbled or sagged or threatened collapse. "Is there food?" "Some." "Is there firewood?" "Some." "Is there anything here in actual abundance, or should I just plan on freezing to death slowly?" Caleb leaned against the doorframe. "You always this pleasant?" "Only when I'm contemplating my terrible decisions." She started opening cupboards, taking inventory. Beans, flour, coffee. Some questionable-looking salt pork. Enough to survive on barely, if you didn't mind surviving miserably. "How long has it been this bad?" "Define bad." "The part where you're one missed payment from losing everything." His expression went flat. "Who told you that?" "Nobody had to tell me. I can read a situation." She turned to face him fully. "My father sold me to clear his own debts. You think I don't recognize desperation when I see it? The only difference between you and him is you're too proud to admit it yet." For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then, "You should have stayed in Ohio." "You already said that." "I meant it both times." He stepped back outside, letting the cold rush in. "I'll bring water." After he left, Evelyn stood in the middle of the cabin and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back during the 2-week journey. Fear, anger, exhaustion so complete it felt like drowning on dry land. She was 23 years old, unmarried, and so far past her father's patience that he'd literally sold her to the first man desperate enough to answer an ad. Healthy, decent cook, won't complain. That's how the listing had described her, like livestock, like something useful if you didn't look too close. She wasn't healthy. Years of poor food and poorer treatment had left her thin and prone to illness. She was an adequate cook at best, and complaining was basically her only developed skill. But she was here now, and going back wasn't an option, even if she'd wanted to. Evelyn started unpacking. By the time Caleb returned with water, she'd managed to get a fire going in the stove. It wasn't much of a fire. The wood was damp and the stove was damaged, but it was something. Heat, however minimal, made the space fractionally less hostile. You know how to do that? He sounded surprised. Start a fire? Yes, Caleb, women in Ohio aren't completely helpless. Didn't say they were? He set the bucket down. Just didn't expect competence? Someone your size to carry wood. Evelyn looked at the small pile she'd hauled in from the covered porch. Is that a compliment or another observation about how poorly suited I am for frontier life? Just an observation. She started sorting through the food supplies, making mental calculations. When's the last time you ate properly? I eat. That's not what I asked. Caleb pulled off his gloves and moved closer to the stove. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who'd spent his entire life fighting the land for every small victory. You don't have to cook tonight. You just got here. I'm going to cook every night. That's the arrangement, isn't it? You provide shelter, I provide domestic labor. We both pretend this is something other than a business transaction. It doesn't have to be that cold. No? Then what is it? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter. A chance. For both of us. Evelyn stopped sorting and looked at him properly. In the firelight, with his guard fractionally lowered, she could see past the exhaustion to something else. Not hope, exactly. Hope seemed like too generous a word, but maybe the memory of hope, or the ghost of it. A chance at what? She asked. Not being alone. He said it simply, without drama. A statement of fact. Not losing the land my family died trying to keep. And I'm supposed to fix that? No, I'm supposed to keep trying, and you're supposed to... He trailed off, searching for words. Be here. That's all. Just be here. It was possibly the saddest proposal of partnership Evelyn had ever heard. And yet, something about the honesty of it cracked something inside her chest. I'm not going to run, she said, even when it gets bad. It's already bad. Then I'm not going to run even when it gets worse. Caleb studied her like he was trying to decide whether she meant it. Finally, he nodded once. Reverend comes at noon tomorrow. We can do this proper, or we can send him away. Your choice. What's your choice? I already made it when I posted the ad. Evelyn turned back to the food. Then I'll make beans. Try not to judge my cooking until you've had at least 3 meals. He almost smiled. Almost. Fair enough. Got dates. That night, alone in the cabin while Caleb kept his word and slept in the barn, Evelyn lay awake listening to the wind tear at the walls. The fire had died down to embers. The darkness was so complete it felt solid, like something pressing down on her chest. She thought about her father's face when he'd told her about the arrangement. No apology, no regret, just relief that she was finally someone else's problem. You're 23, he'd said. Nobody local's going to marry you now. This way at least you're useful. Her mother had already been dead 4 years by then. Sometimes Evelyn wondered if that had been intentional too, if her mother had simply decided that dying was easier than staying married to a man who saw his family as assets to be liquidated when times got hard. The wind hit the cabin again, and something outside, a shutter, maybe, or a piece of loose wood, banged repeatedly against the wall. The sound was irregular enough to prevent sleep. Bang. Silence. Bang, bang. Silence. Bang. Evelyn got up, wrapped herself in the thinnest blanket she'd ever encountered, and opened the door. The cold outside was vicious. It didn't just touch exposed skin, It attacked it. Her eyes watered immediately, but she could see the problem. A section of wood siding had come loose and was flapping in the wind. She looked toward the barn. No light. Caleb was probably asleep, and waking him seemed cruel given that he'd spent the entire day working trap lines in this same brutal weather. Evelyn found a hammer in a box near the door and went outside. The wind tried to knock her down. Actually tried, like it had intention behind it. She wedged herself against the cabin wall and hammered the loose board back into place. The nails were old and bent, and half of them missed the board entirely, but eventually she got enough of them in to hold. When she turned around, Caleb was standing there in the snow. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Fixing your cabin." "In the middle of the night?" "It was making noise." He took the hammer from her hands. "You could have called me." "You were asleep." "So were you, presumably, until the noise woke you up." "Yes, well," Evelyn's teeth were chattering so hard she could barely form words. "Now it's fixed, and we can both sleep." Caleb looked at the board, then at her, then back at the board. "Those nails won't hold past the next big wind." "Then I'll hammer them again." "You'll freeze before dawn if you keep this up." "I've been freezing since I got here. At least now I'm freezing productively." This time he definitely almost smiled. "Get back inside. I'll do it right." Evelyn didn't argue. She was cold enough that pride seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. She went back into the cabin, fed the fire, and listened to the sound of Caleb properly securing the board. It took him maybe 5 minutes, the efficient work of someone who'd been repairing this place his entire life. When he came back in, she'd put coffee on to heat. "You don't have to," he started. "I'm making it for me. You can have some if you want, or you can go back to the barn and freeze out of stubbornness." He sat down at the table without another word. They drank coffee in silence while the wind howled outside. It wasn't good coffee. The beans were old and the water tasted like metal, but it was hot, and that counted for something. "You hammer like someone who's done it before," Caleb said eventually. "My father wasn't good at much, but he did teach me basic repairs, cheaper than hiring someone." "Practical. That's one word for it." He turned the cup in his hands. "This isn't going to be easy. The ranch, I mean. It's not just the debt. The land's hard, the weather's harder, and there are people who'd rather see me fail than succeed." "Because?" "Because I won't sell. Because my father wouldn't sell. Because this ranch sits on water rights that are worth more than everything else combined. And there's a man who's been trying to get control of them for 15 years. Evelyn felt something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Who?" "Gideon Voss. Owns half the territory, wants to own the other half." "And he wants this place?" "He wants the water. The land's just a bonus." "So why not sell? Take whatever he's offering and start over somewhere easier?" Caleb's expression hardened. "Because this land belonged to my father, and his father before that. Because some things matter more than easy. Because if I sell to Voss, I'm spitting on every sacrifice my family made to keep this place free." Evelyn understood that. Not agreeing necessarily, but understanding. She'd watched her father sacrifice everything else, dignity, family, basic decency, trying to hold on to a farm that wasn't worth the effort. Pride made people do destructive things. "And marrying me helps how?" she asked. "Makes me look stable. Like I'm planning long term. Banks are more likely to extend credit to a married man. So I'm collateral. Your partnership, there's a difference." "Not much of one." Caleb met her eyes across the table. "I'm not your father. I won't trade you away when things get hard. That's not who I am." "Everyone says that until the bills come due." "Then I guess you'll find out what kind of man I am." They finished the coffee. Caleb went back to the barn. Evelyn lay awake until dawn, listening to the wind and wondering what kind of man she'd just agreed to marry. The Reverend arrived at noon, exactly as promised. He was an old man with a face like weathered leather and eyes that had seen every possible variation of human misery. "Caleb," he said by way of greeting. "Reverend? This the bride?" "Evelyn Mercer." The Reverend looked her over with the clinical assessment of someone who'd presided over too many desperate weddings. "You sure about this girl?" "No," Evelyn said honestly. "But I'm doing it anyway." He barked out a laugh. "At least you're honest. That's something." He pulled out a worn Bible. "Let's make this official before someone changes their mind." The ceremony took maybe 5 minutes. No flowers, no music, no guests. Just 3 people standing in a cold cabin while words were spoken that would legally bind 2 strangers together until death separated them. Do you, Caleb Harrow, take this woman? I do. Do you, Evelyn Mercer, take this man? She looked at Caleb, really looked at him, saw the desperation he was trying to hide, the exhaustion he couldn't, the last shreds of hope he was clinging to. She saw a man one bad season away from losing everything. She saw herself. I do. Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you married. Kiss her if you want, or don't. Makes no difference to the law. Caleb looked at Evelyn. She looked back. Neither of them moved. Right, the Reverend said. I'll just mark this in the book then. After he left, they stood in the cabin like 2 people who'd just realized what they'd done. So, Evelyn said eventually. So, now what? Now we figure out how to survive winter. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even particularly optimistic, but it was honest, and Evelyn was starting to think honesty might be the only thing worth holding on to out here. Contact. The first week was brutal. Not because of Caleb. He kept his distance, stayed polite, worked from dawn until dark on tasks that seemed endless. Brutal because the land itself felt actively hostile. Everything was harder than it should have been. Water had to be hauled from the creek, which meant breaking ice first. Wood had to be chopped, and the cold made the axe handle so painful to grip that Evelyn's hands bled inside her gloves. Food had to be stretched, rationed, made to last longer than it wanted to. And the cold. The cold was relentless. Evelyn had grown up poor, but she'd never experienced poverty quite like this. The kind where survival was measured in how many hours you could stay functional before the cold or hunger or sheer exhaustion dragged you under. But she'd meant what she said. She wasn't running. She repaired the cabin one board at a time. She learned to make the stove work despite its damage. She figured out how to make beans interesting 3 meals in a row, which was harder than it sounded. She took inventory of everything they owned and started making lists of what they'd need to survive, let alone thrive. Caleb noticed. You don't have to do all this, he said one evening, coming in to find her reorganizing the storage area. Yes, I do. If I stop moving, I'll realize how cold I am. He hung up his coat. You're different than I expected. Everyone keeps saying that. What did you expect? Someone who'd complain more. Oh, I'm complaining, constantly. You just can't hear it because I'm doing it internally. She straightened and wiped dust off her hands. Besides, complaining doesn't fix anything. Work fixes things. Not always. No, but it's better than sitting around waiting for things to get worse on their own. Caleb pulled off his boots and moved to the fire. He'd been out checking trap lines all day, and he looked half frozen. Found 2 traps sprung, nothing in them. Stolen? Or I'm losing my touch. Or someone's interfering. He glanced at her. Voss? You said he wants you gone. Stealing pelts seems beneath him. Does it? Or does it seem exactly like something a man does when he wants to make sure you can't make your payments? Caleb was quiet for a moment. If he's interfering with the trap lines, we're in trouble. Pelts are the only income we have before spring. Then we find another income source. Like what? I don't know yet, but there has to be something. Evelyn went back to organizing, moving supplies into categories. How much is the debt? Total? $800. She nearly dropped the jar she was holding. 800? 300 to the bank, 500 to Voss, who bought up paper from various creditors. So he owns most of your debt, which means he sets the terms, and the terms are getting worse. Evelyn did the math in her head. $800 might as well have been $8,000. They'd need a miracle season just to make the interest payments. When's it due? Spring. First payments due April 15th. 4 months. They had 4 months to come up with money they didn't have, using resources that were actively being undermined, in weather that made every task twice as hard as it should be. We're in trouble, Evelyn said quietly. Yes. Real trouble. Yes. She turned to face him. So what do we do? Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time since she'd arrived. We try. We try until we can't anymore, and then we try anyway. That's all anyone can do out here. It wasn't encouraging, but it was something. The blizzard hit 2 weeks after the wedding. Evelyn woke to a silence so complete it felt wrong. Then she heard it, the wind, but different. Not the constant howl they'd gotten used to, but something larger, something that meant trouble. She got up and opened the door. Snow was falling so thick she couldn't see the barn, couldn't see anything beyond a few feet of white chaos. "Close it," Caleb said from behind her. "We're snowed in." "For how long?" "However long it takes." He was already getting dressed, layering clothes. "I need to check the barn before it gets worse. Animals need feeding." "I'll come with you." "No." "I wasn't asking permission." He turned, frustration clear on his face. "You'll freeze. It's too cold." "You'll freeze too if you go alone and something happens. 2 people means 1 person can go for help if needed." "There is no help. There's just us." "Exactly my point." They stared at each other. Evelyn could see him calculating risks, weighing options, trying to find a good argument against her logic. "Fine," he said finally. "But stay close. If you fall behind, I'm not stopping. If I fall behind, leave me. I'm not asking you to be heroic." They roped themselves together, actually roped, like mountaineers, and stepped into the storm. The wind hit like a fist. Evelyn gasped and immediately regretted it as freezing air seared her lungs. She couldn't breathe right, couldn't see, could barely stay upright against the force of the wind. Caleb pulled her forward. She focused on his back, on following, on not thinking about how completely the storm had swallowed the world. The barn was maybe 50 yards from the cabin. It took them 15 minutes to reach it. Inside, out of the wind, Evelyn bent over and tried to remember how to breathe normally. Her face felt frozen. Her hands were numb despite the gloves. "Still think this was a good idea?" Caleb asked. "Ask me when my face thaws." He almost smiled. Then he got to work. There were 2 horses and a milk cow, all of them stressed by the storm. Caleb fed them while Evelyn checked the water, frozen solid. She found a pick and started breaking ice, her hands screaming with every impact. "Let me," Caleb started. "I've got it." "Evelyn, I've got it." She broke the ice, got water for the animals, helped Caleb secure a section of the roof that was starting to come loose, did everything she could to pull her weight, because if she didn't, if she admitted that the cold was winning, she might never stop running. When they finally got back to the cabin, she collapsed near the stove. "You're shaking," Caleb said, observant. He brought blankets, built up the fire, made coffee that was more sugar than actual coffee. "You could have died out there." "So could you." "I know what I'm doing, and I'm learning." Evelyn wrapped her hands around the cup, trying to feel her fingers again. "Besides, we're married now. That means your problems are my problems." "That's not how it works." "Isn't it? You married me to look stable, to get credit, to have help." "Well, this is help. It's not pretty and it's not comfortable, but it's real." Caleb sat down across from her. Snow was melting in his hair, making him look younger. "You didn't sign up for this." "I signed up for whatever this turned into. That was the deal." "The deal was supposed to be easier than this." "Nothing in my life has ever been easy. Why would this be different?" He didn't have an answer for that. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days trapped in a cabin barely bigger than a large room, with nothing to do except keep the fire going and try not to think about what would happen if they ran out of firewood or food or luck. They talked because there was nothing else to do. Caleb told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father, who'd been hard but fair, about his mother, who died bringing his younger sister into the world, a sister who'd lived less than a year, about inheriting debt along with the land, and realizing that everything his family had built was held together by increasingly desperate loans. Evelyn told him about Ohio, about a mother who'd faded away slowly, like someone turning down a lamp, about a father who'd seen her as a burden from the moment her mother died, about years of working without thanks, eating without joy, existing without purpose. "Why didn't you leave?" Caleb asked. "Where would I go? A woman alone with no money and no prospects? I'd have ended up in a situation worse than this." "This isn't so bad." She looked around the cabin, at the dirt floor, the cracked stove, the walls that let in more cold than they kept out. "You have a very generous definition of not so bad. We're alive. We're warm enough. We're fed enough. That's more than some people have." That's a pretty low bar. Out here, low bars are the only kind that matter. On the third night, when the storm finally started to break, they sat by the fire and Evelyn asked the question she'd been holding back. Do you think we can actually do this? Make this work? Caleb took a long time to answer. I don't know. The honest answer is, I don't know. The debt's real. Voss is real. The land's barely producing enough to keep us alive, let alone pay off what we owe. We'd need luck we haven't had in years. But I've been trying to do this alone for a long time, and I'm tired of being alone. He looked at her. You're stronger than you look. Tougher than I expected. If anyone can help me figure this out, maybe it's you. It wasn't a declaration of love, wasn't even a promise, but it was honest, and honesty was the only currency that mattered out here. Then we'll figure it out, Evelyn said. Together. Together, he agreed. Outside, the storm was dying. Inside, for the first time since arriving, Evelyn felt something other than fear. She felt possibility. More sunk. 2 days after the storm cleared, while they were digging out the paths between the cabin and barn, a rider appeared. Not Voss himself. Evelyn would learn later that Gideon Voss didn't do his own dirty work. This was a man named Pike, who worked as Voss's foreman, enforcer, and general reminder that resistance was expensive. Harrow, Pike said from horseback. He didn't dismount, didn't acknowledge Evelyn at all. Pike, Mr. Voss wanted me to check on you. Storm like that, he was concerned about his investment. How thoughtful. He also wanted me to remind you about the spring payment. April 15th, $300. I'm aware of the date. Are you aware of the consequences if you miss it? Because Mr. Voss wants to make sure we understand each other. Caleb's jaw tightened. We understand each other fine. Pike smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. Do we? Because from where I'm sitting, you're one bad month from losing everything. And Mr. Voss, he's a patient man, but his patience has limits. Tell Voss I'll have his money. Will you? Because I've been by your trap lines. Hasn't been much activity there lately. So it was Voss. Interfering, undermining, making sure Caleb failed. That's illegal, Evelyn said. Pike finally looked at her. You must be the new wife. Mail order, wasn't it? Desperate times. Careful, Caleb said quietly. Just making conversation. Pike's smile widened. Pretty thing like her must be hard keeping her fed through winter, especially when the money runs out. Evelyn stepped forward before Caleb could stop her. I've survived harder things than winter, and I've dealt with bigger bullies than you. Pike's expression darkened. That right? That's right. So you can ride back to your boss and tell him we're not scared. Tell him we'll make the payment, and tell him if I catch anyone near our trap lines again, they're going to regret it. You threatening me? I'm making a promise. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Pike laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. You've got spirit. Won't help when Voss takes this place, but it's entertaining. He turned his horse. April 15th, Harrow. Don't make us come collect. After he rode away, Caleb turned to Evelyn. That was stupid. Probably. He'll tell Voss. Make things worse. Things are already worse. At least now they know we're not just going to roll over. We're supposed to be keeping our heads down. Your way wasn't working. Caleb opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Because she was right. Keeping his head down, being polite, hoping Voss would show mercy, none of it had worked. The debt kept growing. The trap lines kept failing. The ranch kept dying by inches. You're going to get us killed, he said finally. Maybe. Or maybe I'm going to help us survive. Evelyn picked up the shovel she'd dropped. Either way, I'm done being scared. I was scared my whole life in Ohio. I'm not doing it here. She went back to digging. After a moment, Caleb joined her. They worked in silence until the paths were clear. And if Evelyn noticed that Caleb kept glancing toward where Pike had disappeared, she didn't mention it. She'd meant what she said. She was done being scared. Now she just had to figure out how to turn defiance into survival. That was going to be the hard part. The confrontation with Pike changed something between them. Not trust exactly, that would take longer, but a kind of mutual recognition. They were both trapped in the same impossible situation, and pretending otherwise was a waste of energy neither could afford. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Caleb worked the trap lines, what was left of them, and Evelyn turned her attention to everything else: the cabin, the supplies, the thousand small repairs that added up to the difference between surviving and not. She learned quickly that nothing on the frontier came easy. The simplest tasks back in Ohio became elaborate productions out here. Washing clothes meant hauling water, heating it over a fire that never got hot enough, scrubbing until her knuckles bled, then hanging everything to freeze dry in air so cold it hurt to breathe. Cooking meant rationing ingredients she didn't have enough of while trying to make meals interesting enough that they didn't lose the will to eat. Even sleep was work. The cabin was so poorly insulated that she'd wake multiple times each night to feed the fire, because letting it die meant waking to temperatures that could actually kill them. But she didn't complain, not out loud anyway. "You're limping," Caleb said one morning, watching her carry water from the creek. "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." Evelyn set the bucket down harder than necessary. "I slipped on the ice yesterday. Twisted my ankle. It'll heal." "You should have said something." "Why? So you could do it instead? You're already doing everything else." "That's not—" He stopped, visibly searching for the right words. "You don't have to prove anything." "Don't I?" "You married a stranger who showed up looking half dead. Every day I don't collapse is me proving I'm not the burden you probably think I am." Caleb's expression shifted, something between frustration and something else she couldn't quite name. "I don't think you're a burden. You did when I got off that wagon." "I thought you looked tired. There's a difference." "Is there?" He moved closer, took the bucket from her hands despite her protest. "Yes. Being tired means you've been working. Being a burden means you quit. You haven't quit." It wasn't poetry, wasn't even particularly romantic, but coming from Caleb Harrow, a man who seemed to measure worth exclusively in endurance, it felt like the closest thing to a compliment she'd received since arriving. "My ankle's fine," she said quietly. "Wrap it anyway. We can't afford for you to make it worse." He carried the water inside, and Evelyn followed, trying not to let him see how much the ankle actually hurt. That afternoon, while Caleb was checking the southern trap lines, a woman appeared at the cabin. She was older, maybe 50, with gray hair pulled back severely and a face that suggested she'd forgotten how to smile sometime around the previous decade. "You're the new Mrs. Harrow," the woman said. It wasn't a question. "Evelyn, Margaret Holloway. I run the general store in town." She looked past Evelyn into the cabin, assessing with the quick efficiency of someone used to evaluating other people's financial situations. "Heard you married Caleb. Wanted to see for myself." "Here I am." Margaret stepped inside without invitation. "Smaller than I expected. City girl?" "Ohio. Same thing out here." She continued her inspection, touching things, moving things, making judgments. "Place looks better than last time I saw it. Cleaner." "Thank you?" "Wasn't a compliment, just an observation." Margaret turned to face her fully. "You know what you got yourself into?" "I'm learning." "Caleb's a good man, stubborn as hell, but good. His father was the same way, would rather die than admit defeat. That stubbornness killed him, eventually." Evelyn felt something cold settle in her stomach. "How?" "Worked himself to death trying to save this place. Heart gave out 3 winters back. Caleb found him frozen in the barn." Margaret said it matter-of-factly, like she was describing weather. "That's when Voss started circling. Knew Caleb couldn't handle the debt alone. But he tried anyway." "Course he did. Pride's a hell of a drug." Margaret moved to the window, looked out at the frozen landscape. "You seem tougher than the last girl." "There was another girl?" 2 years ago. Mail order, like you. Pretty thing, completely useless. Lasted 6 weeks before her family sent money for a ticket back east. Caleb paid for the annulment himself, which he couldn't afford but did anyway because that's the kind of stupid honorable he is." Evelyn absorbed this information. He didn't mention that. "Why would he? It's embarrassing." Margaret turned back. "Point is, you're not the first woman to think she could handle frontier life. You're just the first one who hasn't run yet. Question is whether you'll last longer than 6 weeks." "I will." "You sound sure." "I don't have anywhere else to go." Tends to make a person committed. Margaret studied her with eyes that had seen too much to be impressed easily. "That's either the saddest thing I've heard this week or the smartest. Haven't decided which." She moved toward the door. I came to tell you there's a gathering next week. Quilting circle, technically, but it's really just an excuse for the ranch wives to complain about their husbands and share gossip. I don't quilt. Neither do half the women there. Come anyway. You need to know who your neighbors are, and they need to know you're not going to fall apart the first time things get hard. Things are already hard. Then you'll fit right in. Margaret pulled her coat tighter. Thursday afternoon, Holloway Place, 5 miles west. Don't bring anything except yourself and a tolerance for judgment. After she left, Evelyn stood in the cabin and tried to process what she'd just learned. Caleb had been married before. Or almost married. And the woman had left because the life was too hard. She understood the impulse. Every morning she woke up and had to actively choose to stay, to keep trying, to not just give up and find some way back to Ohio, even though Ohio had nothing for her except more of the same poverty and powerlessness she'd been trying to escape. When Caleb came back that evening, she was making supper. More beans, this time with the last of the questionable salt pork cut into pieces so small they were more suggestion than substance. Margaret Holloway stopped by, Evelyn said. Caleb's expression went carefully neutral. What did she want? To inspect me mostly. See if I'm going to last longer than your previous attempt at marriage. He set down his gear slowly. She told you about Sarah. She mentioned there was a girl, didn't give details. There aren't many details to give. I posted an ad. She answered. She arrived, took one look at the place, and spent 6 weeks crying about how hard everything was. His voice was flat, emotionless. Then her family bought her a ticket home, and I paid a lawyer to make the marriage go away. Must have been expensive. It was. Worth it? She was miserable. I was miserable. Yeah, it was worth it. He moved to wash his hands in the basin. Margaret tell you anything else? That your father died trying to save this place. That Voss has been waiting for you to fail ever since. Also true. Evelyn stirred the beans, watching them bubble. You could have mentioned the previous marriage. Why? It didn't work. This one might not either. Didn't seem relevant. It's relevant because now I know what I'm competing against. He turned to look at her. You're not competing against anything. Aren't I? You married someone before. She couldn't handle it. Now you're stuck with me, wondering if I'm going to break the same way. You're nothing like Sarah. How do you know? Because Sarah spent 6 weeks crying and you've spent 6 weeks fixing things. He said it simply, like it was obvious. You're still here. That's more than she managed. It shouldn't have felt like praise. It was barely above the absolute minimum requirement for continued existence, but somehow it did. Margaret invited me to a quilting circle, Evelyn said. Thursday. You should go. I don't know these people. That's why you should go. You'll need friends out here. I don't need friends. I need to make sure we don't freeze or starve. Caleb pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. Evelyn, go to the gathering. Meet the other wives. Learn what you can from them. That's as important as anything else. Why? Because surviving out here isn't just about work. It's about knowing who'll help you when things get bad and who won't. He looked at her seriously. We can't do this alone. My father tried, and it killed him. I'm trying, and it's killing me. We need people. Evelyn ladled beans into bowls. And if these people decide I'm not worth helping, then we'll know where we stand. Thursday came too quickly. Evelyn borrowed Caleb's horse. They only had the two, and he needed the other for trap lines, and rode west toward the Holloway place. The 5 miles felt like 50. The cold was relentless, and by the time she arrived, her face was so numb she couldn't feel her own features. The Holloway house was bigger than Caleb's cabin, but not by much. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she could hear voices inside, women's voices layered over each other in conversation. Evelyn almost turned around, almost rode back to the cabin where she could be cold and miserable, but at least alone. Then she thought about Caleb's words. We need people. She tied up the horse and went inside. 6 women sat around a large table, fabric and thread scattered everywhere. The conversation stopped the moment she entered. Well, Margaret said, she actually came. Everyone, this is Evelyn Harrow. Evelyn, this is everyone. The introductions happened quickly. Ruth, who ran a sheep operation with her husband. Anna, whose ranch was even smaller than Caleb's. Elizabeth, who was pregnant with her fourth child and looked exhausted about it. Clara and Jane, sisters who'd married brothers and spent most of their time arguing with each other. And Susan, who was maybe 22 and watched Evelyn with open curiosity. "So you're the one who married Caleb," Susan said. "Everyone thought he'd given up after Sarah." "I'm not Sarah," Evelyn replied. "Obviously, Sarah was prettier." "Susan," Margaret said sharply. "What? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." Ruth cleared her throat. "Ignore her. She has no manners." She gestured to an empty chair. "Sit. Do you actually know how to quilt, or are you like the rest of us and just pretending?" "I can sew," Evelyn said carefully. "Not well, but adequately." "That's more than some of us can claim." Ruth pushed fabric toward her. "We're working on a blanket for Anna's daughter. She's getting married in spring." Evelyn picked up a needle and thread, trying to remember the last time she'd done anything purely social. Years, probably. Her father hadn't believed in wasting time on things that didn't produce immediate value. The women talked while they worked. Mostly gossip, who was struggling, who was thriving, who'd been seen where with whom. But underneath the gossip was information. Real, useful information about how to survive out here. "The Morrison place finally sold," Clara mentioned. "Voss bought it." "Of course he did," Jane replied. "That's what, the fourth ranch this year?" "Fifth. He got the Patterson place in October." Elizabeth looked up from her sewing. "How does he keep doing it? Where's the money coming from?" "Banks love him because he always pays. We all hate him because he's destroying the territory, but the banks just see profit." Anna shook her head. "My husband says Voss won't be satisfied until he owns everything from here to Denver." "Your husband's probably right." Ruth glanced at Evelyn. "I'm guessing Caleb's told you about Voss?" "Some. The man's a snake. He finds ranches that are struggling, offers loans with terms that seem reasonable, then adjusts those terms when people can't pay. By the time you realize you're trapped, it's too late." "That's what happened to the Morrisons," Clara added. "Borrowed money for seed, couldn't pay it back after a bad harvest, suddenly found out the interest had tripled. Voss ended up with their land for a fraction of what it was worth." Evelyn kept sewing, processing this information. "Is that legal?" "Legal enough. He's got lawyers who make sure everything looks proper on paper, and he's got judges who owe him favors." "So there's no fighting it?" "Not that anyone's figured out." Susan leaned forward. "Why? Is Caleb planning to fight?" "I don't know what Caleb's planning." "Smart answer," Margaret said approvingly. "Never tell people more than they need to know." The conversation shifted to other topics: weather, children, the difficulties of getting supplies during winter. But Evelyn's mind stayed on Voss. If he'd taken 5 ranches this year alone, and if the pattern was as consistent as these women suggested, then he wasn't just a bully. He was systematic, organized, running what amounted to a territory-wide operation designed to transfer land from desperate families to himself. "How long has this been going on?" Evelyn asked during a lull in conversation. "Voss's buying spree? Maybe 10 years, Ruth replied. "Started small after his father died and left him money. Now he owns more land than anyone else in 3 counties. And nobody's tried to stop him? Stop him how? He's not breaking any laws, at least none that can be proved, and the people he's hurting are too broke and too scared to fight back. So he just wins." Ruth met her eyes. "So far, yes. He just wins." They sewed in silence for a while after that. Evelyn's hands moved automatically, stitching pieces of fabric together while her mind worked through the problem. Voss wasn't unbeatable. Nobody was. But he'd built a system designed to make fighting back nearly impossible. Money, lawyers, judges, fear. A perfect trap. "How much does Caleb owe him?" Susan asked suddenly. "Susan," Margaret snapped. "That's inappropriate. Everyone already knows anyway. Might as well ask directly." "I don't know the exact amount," Evelyn said carefully. Which was true. She knew the total debt, but not how it was distributed between Voss and the bank. "Enough to be in trouble," Anna said quietly. "I've seen Pike riding past your place. He doesn't visit unless Voss is getting impatient." "When's the next payment due?" Claire asked. "April." The women exchanged looks. "That's not much time," Ruth said carefully. "No, it's not." "What are you going to do?" Evelyn looked up from her sewing. "Whatever it takes." Susan laughed. "That's not a plan. It's the only plan I've got." When the gathering ended and Evelyn rode back toward the cabin, the sun was already setting. The cold felt worse somehow, sharper, now that she knew how many other families were fighting the same battle. How many had already lost? Caleb was outside chopping wood when she arrived. "How was it?" he asked. "Informative." She dismounted, her hands so cold she fumbled with the reins. "They all know about our debt. They all know about Voss, and they all assume we're going to lose. Probably because we are." That's a depressing attitude. It's a realistic one. He sank the axe into the chopping block and straightened. "What did they tell you?" "That Voss has been doing this for years, that he's got a system, that nobody's been able to fight back successfully. And I'm trying to figure out if that's because fighting back is impossible or because nobody's tried hard enough." Caleb picked up an armload of wood. "Those are the same thing." "No, they're not. One's a fact, the other's a choice." He looked at her for a long moment. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that if Voss has been doing this for 10 years, there's a pattern. Patterns can be studied. And if you study something long enough, you find weaknesses. He doesn't have weaknesses, he has lawyers and money. Everyone has weaknesses." Evelyn followed him inside, her mind already working through possibilities. "We just have to find his." Over the following weeks, Evelyn became obsessive. Every time she went into town, which wasn't often because trips cost time and money they didn't have, she listened, talked to people, asked careful questions about Voss and his operations. She learned that he owned the largest ranch in the territory, plus a controlling interest in the bank, plus shares in various businesses. That he employed maybe 30 men, most of them loyal because he paid well. That he lived in a house that people called the mansion, even though it was really just a large farmhouse with delusions of grandeur. She also learned that people were terrified of him. Not because he was violent, he wasn't, at least not directly, but because he had the power to destroy lives with paperwork. A signature here, a contract there, and suddenly you owed money you couldn't pay. "You're asking a lot of questions about Voss," Caleb said one evening. "I'm gathering information." "Why?" "Because we're fighting him. I want to know who we're fighting." "We're not fighting him. We're trying to survive him. There's a difference." Evelyn slammed the book she was reading, an old account ledger she'd found in a trunk. "How is that different? We pay him, or he takes everything. That's a fight." "It's a fight we can't win." "Not with that attitude." Caleb stood up, frustration clear on his face. "What do you want me to say? That we'll magically find the money? That Voss will suddenly develop a conscience? This isn't a story, Evelyn. It's real life, and in real life, men like Voss win. Men like Voss win because people like us give up before trying." "I've been trying for 3 years." "You've been surviving. That's not the same as fighting." They stared at each other across the cabin. Outside, wind howled. Inside, the fire crackled. Everything else was silence. "What do you want from me?" Caleb asked quietly. "I want you to believe we can win." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because I've lost too many times." He sat back down, suddenly looking years older. "I watched my father work himself to death trying to keep this place. I've spent 3 years bleeding money and hope. I married you because I was desperate and out of options. I can't believe we'll win because every piece of evidence suggests we won't." Evelyn moved closer, crouched down so she could meet his eyes. "Then believe I'll believe for both of us. Because I'm not giving up. Not on the ranch, not on you, and definitely not to some land baron who thinks fear is a business strategy. You're going to get hurt. I'm already hurt. I've been hurt my whole life. At least here I'm hurt fighting for something that matters." Caleb reached out, hesitated, then put his hand on her shoulder. It was the first time he'd touched her intentionally since the wedding. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish. Can't I be both?" He almost smiled. "Yeah, I guess you can." That night, lying awake while Caleb slept on the other side of the room, they still maintained separate sleeping arrangements. Though the cold made the distinction increasingly theoretical, Evelyn made herself a promise. She would find a way to beat Voss. Not just survive him, not just delay the inevitable, actually beat him. She had no idea how, but she'd figure it out. She always figured it out. 2 weeks later, everything changed. A storm rolled in, not as bad as the blizzard, but bad enough that Caleb couldn't check the trap lines. They spent the day inside, doing small tasks, trying not to get in each other's way. Around noon, Evelyn noticed water dripping from the ceiling. Caleb, he looked up. What? The roof's leaking. They both stared at the expanding wet spot on the ceiling. Then, in perfect synchronization, they grabbed buckets and positioned them under the drips. How bad is it? Evelyn asked. Won't know until I can get up there and look. Can't do that until the storm passes. And if it gets worse before then? Then we get wet. The leak got worse. By evening, they had 5 buckets positioned around the cabin, each one filling at different rates. The sound of dripping water was constant, maddening. This is ridiculous, Evelyn said. Welcome to frontier life. How long has the roof been bad? Couple years. I've been patching it. Not well, apparently. Caleb shot her a look. You want to climb up there and do better? If I have to. You're not climbing anywhere. It's too dangerous. And letting the cabin flood isn't? Before he could respond, there was a cracking sound. They both looked up just in time to see a section of the ceiling sag inward. Water poured through, much faster now. Out, Caleb said. Now. They grabbed what they could, coats, blankets, the box with important papers, and ran outside into the storm. Behind them, more of the ceiling collapsed, sending water and debris cascading into the cabin. They stood in the snow, watching their home partially implode, and Evelyn started laughing. She couldn't help it. The absurdity of everything, the debt, the cold, the failing ranch, and now this was too much. She laughed until tears froze on her face. This isn't funny, Caleb said. It's a little funny. Our cabin just collapsed. Partially collapsed. And yes, I know, it's a disaster. But what else can I do? Cry? I'm tired of crying. Caleb looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Then, impossibly, he smiled. Not a big smile. Caleb Harrow didn't do big smiles. But real. You're insane. Probably. Does that change anything? No, we're still homeless. We have the barn. They did have the barn. And so, for the next 3 days while the storm raged and the cabin sat partially destroyed, they lived with the horses and cow. It was cramped. It smelled terrible. The animals were confused by the human invasion, but it was dry and marginally warm, which made it paradise compared to the alternative. I'm sorry, Caleb said on the second night, both of them huddled under blankets in a horse stall. For what? For all of this. You deserved better. Better than what? A collapsing cabin in the middle of nowhere with a husband who thinks we're doomed? Evelyn shifted to look at him. I had better, actually, or I thought I did. Turned out having a roof over my head and food on the table wasn't worth living with a father who saw me as property. At least here, nobody's selling me. Yet. Not ever. That's the point. She pulled the blanket tighter. You keep apologizing for things that aren't your fault. The cabin was already failing when I got here. The debt was already crushing. Voss was already circling. None of that's on you. I brought you into it. I chose to come. There's a difference. They were quiet for a while, listening to the storm and the animals moving restlessly in their stalls. What do we do? Caleb asked finally. About the cabin? About everything. Evelyn thought about it. About the debt hanging over them. About Voss waiting for them to fail. About a roof that needed replacing and money they didn't have and time running out before April. We fight, she said simply. With what? With whatever we've got. We don't have anything. We have each other, and we have information, and we have the fact that Voss thinks we're already beaten. She turned to face him fully. That's something. It's not much, but it's something. Caleb studied her in the dim light. You really believe that? I have to. The alternative is giving up, and I'm not doing that. Even when it's hopeless? Especially then. He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm despite the cold. If we're doing this, we do it together. No more you taking unnecessary risks. No more you trying to prove you're not a burden. I'm not I know. You've proved it. Multiple times. Now prove you can let me help. Evelyn squeezed his hand. Deal. But same goes for you. No more deciding you have to handle everything alone. Deal. They shook on it, like business partners sealing a contract. which Evelyn supposed was essentially what they were. Business partners who happened to be married and currently living in a barn. It wasn't romantic, but it was honest. And out here, honesty was worth more than romance anyway. When the storm finally cleared, they assessed the damage. The cabin was worse than they'd thought. A full quarter of the roof had collapsed, taking part of one wall with it. Everything inside was either waterlogged or destroyed. "It'll take weeks to fix," Caleb said. "Then we'd better start." "Evelyn, I know. We don't have time, we don't have money, we don't have materials, I know all of that." She picked up a piece of broken roof beam. "But we also don't have a choice. We fix it, or we live in the barn forever. Living in the barn might be easier. Maybe, but I'm tired of easier. Let's try better instead." They spent the next 3 weeks rebuilding. It was brutal work, hauling timber, cutting boards, climbing onto a damaged roof in freezing temperatures to nail down new shingles they couldn't actually afford but had to buy anyway. Every night, Evelyn fell asleep so exhausted she couldn't remember lying down. Every morning, she woke up sore in places she didn't know could hurt. But slowly, impossibly, the cabin came back together. The day they moved back inside, Evelyn stood in the middle of the space and felt something close to pride. It wasn't perfect. The repairs were obvious, amateur, but it was whole again. They'd made it whole. "Not bad," Caleb said from the doorway. "Not good either. But standing, that counts for something." Evelyn looked at him. At this man she'd married out of desperation, who'd married her the same way, who was exhausted and losing and still trying anyway. "Yeah," she said quietly. "It counts for something." That night they ate together at the repaired table. Beans again, because everything was always beans, and Evelyn felt something shift. They weren't strangers anymore. Weren't just two desperate people clinging to a failing dream. They were partners. Equals. People who'd rebuilt a roof together and might, maybe, be capable of rebuilding other things too. "Evelyn," Caleb said suddenly. "Yeah? Thank you." "For what?" "For staying, for fighting, for not being like Sarah." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm not Sarah, and you're not my father. We're just us. Whatever that means." He squeezed her fingers gently. "I'm starting to think it means something good." Outside, the Colorado wind howled. Inside, for the first time since arriving, Evelyn felt something that might have been hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep going. And going was all that mattered. The night everything changed started ordinary enough. Caleb was at the table reviewing accounts. Not that reviewing them helped. The numbers stayed stubbornly catastrophic no matter how many times he looked. And Evelyn was mending a shirt by lamplight. The cabin was warm for once, the new roof holding properly, and for a brief moment they could almost pretend things weren't as desperate as they actually were. Then someone knocked on the door. Caleb and Evelyn exchanged glances. Nobody visited after dark. Not out here, not in winter, not unless something was seriously wrong. Caleb opened the door to find Anna standing on the porch, shaking with cold or fear or both. "Anna?" Evelyn was already moving, pulling the woman inside. "What happened?" "It's Thomas." Anna's voice cracked. "Voss called in his debt, all of it. Says we have 30 days to pay or he takes the ranch." Caleb closed the door. "How much?" $600. The number hung in the air like something physical. $600 might as well have been 6,000. Nobody had that kind of money. "When did this happen?" Evelyn asked, guiding Anna to a chair. "This afternoon. Pike came with papers. Legal papers. Thomas tried to argue, but Pike just laughed and said Voss was done waiting." Anna looked up, her face streaked with tears. "We don't have it. We can't pay. We're going to lose everything." Evelyn glanced at Caleb, saw her own thoughts reflected in his expression. If Voss was calling in Anna's debt now, theirs would be next. April was still months away, but Voss didn't play by his own rules when it suited him. "Did Pike say why now?" Caleb asked carefully. "He said Voss is consolidating his holdings, that it's just business." Anna's hand shook as she accepted the cup of coffee Evelyn pressed into them. "But Thomas thinks it's because we spoke against Voss at the town meeting last month, about how he's manipulating contracts." "That's illegal," Evelyn said. "Calling in debt early is retaliation." "Only if you can prove it. And how do you prove intent?" Anna drank the coffee like it was medicine. "We're finished. Thomas is talking about just walking away, leaving before Voss can take it legally. Where would you go? Evelyn asked. I don't know. Denver, maybe. Find work. Start over. She said it without conviction, like someone describing a plan they knew wouldn't work. After Anna left, heading back into the freezing night because Thomas was alone with the children, Evelyn and Caleb sat in silence. We're next, Evelyn said finally. Probably. So what do we do? Caleb pushed the account book away. Same thing Anna's doing. Try to find money that doesn't exist. Fail. Lose everything. That's not a plan. It's reality. Evelyn stood up and started pacing. The cabin was small enough that pacing meant 3 steps in each direction, but she needed to move. There has to be something, some way to fight this. There isn't. Voss has lawyers, he has judges, he has every advantage. Except one. What's that? He thinks he's untouchable. Evelyn stopped pacing and looked at Caleb. Men who think they're untouchable get careless, and careless men make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. Over the next week, Evelyn became relentless. She attended every gathering, every town meeting, every casual conversation where Voss's name might come up. She listened to the ranch wives complain about debt. She watched Pike ride through town with the arrogance of someone who knew he was protected. She started mapping out Voss's empire in her head, who owed him money, who worked for him, where the weak points might be. You're obsessing, Caleb said one night. I'm planning. It looks like obsessing. Call it whatever you want. I'm not sitting around waiting for Voss to destroy us. She'd started keeping notes in the margins of an old ledger, names, dates, amounts. The Morrisons lost their ranch in October. Debt called in early after they complained to the territorial governor. The Patterson place went in September, similar circumstances. Before that, the Chen family, the Williamses, the Kowalskis. Every time someone spoke up or resisted, Voss tightened the noose. It's a pattern, Evelyn said, showing Caleb her notes. Look, every family that tried to fight back had their debt called in early. Every family that stayed quiet got extensions. So the lesson is stay quiet. The lesson is that Voss is using debt as a weapon. And if we can prove that, show that he's deliberately manipulating contracts for revenge, then maybe we can fight him legally. Prove it how? Nobody's going to testify against him. They're too scared. Then we find evidence, documents, records, something concrete. Caleb looked at her like she'd suggested they fly to the moon. You want to break into Voss's house and steal papers? I want to find something that proves what he's doing. Whether that requires breaking into his house is a detail we can figure out later. That's not a detail. That's a crime. So is what he's doing. He's just doing it legally. They argued about it for days. Caleb insisted it was too dangerous. Evelyn insisted doing nothing was more dangerous. They went in circles until finally Caleb threw up his hands and said, Fine, you want to investigate Voss? Start by talking to people who've worked for him. So she did. The first person she approached was a man named Jacob, who'd worked on Voss's ranch for 2 years before getting fired. She found him at the general store, buying tobacco with money he clearly didn't have much of. You're Harrow's new wife, he said when she introduced herself. Evelyn, heard you've been asking about Voss. I'm curious about the man who owns half the territory. Jacob laughed, but there was no humor in it. Curious? That's a polite way to put it. He glanced around to make sure nobody was listening. What do you want to know? What's he like? As a boss? Fair, if you do what you're told. Generous, even. But cross him? Jacob shook his head. I saw him ruin a man for stealing a chicken. Not fire him, ruin him. Made sure he couldn't get work anywhere in 3 counties. How? Letters. Voss wrote to every rancher, every business, told them the man was a thief. Didn't matter that the chicken was payment for wages Voss hadn't paid. The lie spread faster than the truth. Evelyn filed this information away. Does he keep records of the ranches he's acquired? Of course he does. A man like that keeps records of everything. Has a whole office in his house, locked up tight. You've seen it? Once. Delivered papers for Pike, rooms full of filing cabinets, ledgers, contracts, everything organized like a bank. Jacob studied her. Why are you asking? Because I think he's breaking the law, and I want to prove it. Then you're stupider than you look. Nobody proves anything against Voss. He's too careful. Everyone makes mistakes. Not him. And even if he did, who'd believe you? You're nobody. He's Gideon Voss. After Jacob left, Evelyn stood in the general store and felt the weight of what she was considering. Breaking into Voss's house wasn't just dangerous, it was potentially suicidal. If they got caught, Voss wouldn't just call in their debt. He'd destroy them completely. But doing nothing meant losing anyway. That night, she told Caleb what she'd learned. An office full of records, she said. That's what we need. And how exactly do you propose we get into Voss's locked office inside his guarded house? I don't know yet, but there's got to be a way. There isn't. There's always a way. Caleb slammed his hand on the table, making the lamp jump. Stop. Just stop. You can't fix this by being brave or clever or stubborn. Some things can't be fixed. I don't believe that. Then you're lying to yourself. They stared at each other across the table. Outside, wind battered the cabin. Inside, the silence was thick enough to cut. I'm scared, Evelyn said finally. I'm terrified, actually, but I'm more scared of giving up, of letting Voss win without even trying. Because if we do that, if we just accept this, then what was the point of any of it? The wedding, the roof, the rebuilding? Why bother if we're just going to surrender? Caleb's expression softened slightly. I'm trying to keep you alive. I don't want to be alive if it means being powerless. That's easy to say now. No, it's not. It's the hardest thing I've ever said. Evelyn moved closer. But it's true. I spent 23 years being powerless, being someone things happened to instead of someone who made things happen. I'm not doing that anymore. Even if it gets you killed? Even then. For a long moment, Caleb said nothing. Then he stood, walked to the window, looked out at the darkness. If we do this, and I'm not saying we should, but if we do, we plan it properly. We don't rush in like fools. Agreed. And if it goes wrong, you run. You don't try to save me. You don't try to be heroic. You run and you save yourself. I'm not agreeing to that. Then I'm not agreeing to help. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to insist they'd protect each other, but she could see from Caleb's expression that this wasn't negotiable. Fine, she lied. If it goes wrong, I'll run. He didn't believe her, she could tell, but he nodded anyway because they both needed to pretend the plan was reasonable. They spent the next 2 weeks gathering information. Evelyn talked to everyone who'd ever worked for Voss or done business with him. She learned that Voss hosted a monthly card game for the wealthy ranchers and businessmen in the territory, that his household staff consisted of a cook, a housekeeper, and 2 men who served as guards, that he kept late hours in his office, often working until midnight. The card game, Evelyn said one night, that's our opening. How? Everyone's distracted. Voss is hosting, so he's not in his office. The guards are watching the guests, not an empty room. If we can get inside while the game's happening, we might have time to search. And how do we get inside? The housekeeper. Her name's Martha. I met her at the quilting circle. She comes sometimes because Margaret's her sister. She hates Voss. Says he treats his staff like servants instead of people. Caleb raised an eyebrow. You want to recruit Voss's housekeeper into a burglary? I want to ask if she'd be willing to leave a door unlocked. That's all. We do the rest. That's not all. That's conspiracy. Only if we get caught. They visited Martha 2 days later, finding her at Margaret's house on her day off. She was older, maybe 60, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. I know why you're here, she said before they could explain. Margaret told me you've been asking about Voss. We need your help, Evelyn said simply, to break into his house, to access information that proves he's breaking the law. Martha stirred her tea slowly. Why should I help you? Because he's destroying families. Because what he's doing is wrong. Because someone needs to stop him. And you think you're that someone? A girl who's been here 4 months and a rancher 1 payment from losing everything? Yes. Martha studied her for a long moment. Then she laughed, sharp and bitter. You've got courage. Stupid courage, but courage. She set down her tea. I can leave the back door unlocked during the next card game. That's this Thursday. But that's all I'm doing. You get caught? I never heard of this conversation. Understood. And if Voss finds out I helped you, I'll deny everything. We'd expect nothing less. Martha stood up. Thursday, 10 o'clock. Door will be unlocked for exactly 1 hour. After that, you're on your own. After they left, Caleb turned to Evelyn. We're really doing this. We're really doing this. We're insane. Probably. Does that change anything? He looked at her, really looked at her, the way he had that first day when she'd stepped off the wagon. But his expression now was different. Not calculating, not resigned, something else. No, he said quietly. It doesn't change anything. Thursday came too fast and too slow. Evelyn spent the day preparing. Dark clothes, a bag for carrying papers, a story ready in case they got caught. The story was thin at best. They'd gotten lost riding home from town, saw the house, stopped to ask for directions. Nobody would believe it, but having something prepared felt better than nothing. Caleb checked and rechecked the route. Voss's house was 5 miles from their ranch, through terrain that was unforgiving even in daylight. At night, in February, it would be brutal. We could still back out, he said as the sun started to set. We could, but we're not going to. No. They left at 9, riding slowly to avoid attention. The night was clear. No storm, just crushing cold and a moon bright enough to cast shadows. Evelyn's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack a rib. They tied the horses a 1/4 mile from Voss's house and covered the rest on foot. The mansion, everyone called it that, even though it was just a large ranch house, sat on a hill, lights blazing from the windows. They could hear voices inside, laughter, the sounds of men enjoying themselves. Back door, Caleb whispered. They circled around, staying low, using shadows. Every snapped twig sounded like a gunshot. Every breath seemed too loud. The back door was unlocked, exactly as promised. Inside was a kitchen, dark and empty. Beyond that, a hallway. Voices came from the front of the house, the card game, probably in the parlor. Evelyn could make out individual words if she concentrated. Someone was winning. Someone else was complaining about the cold. Office is upstairs, Caleb breathed, barely audible. Second door on the right. They climbed the stairs one at a time, testing each step before putting weight on it. The wood creaked anyway. Evelyn was sure someone would hear, would come investigating, would find them. Nobody came. The office door was closed but not locked. Inside, exactly as Jacob had described, were filing cabinets and ledgers and stacks of papers organized with obsessive precision. By moonlight through the window, Evelyn could see labels on the cabinets, properties acquired, outstanding debts, legal contracts. Start with debts, she whispered. They worked quickly, pulling files, scanning for anything useful. Most of it was standard, loan agreements, payment schedules, nothing obviously illegal. But then Evelyn found a ledger marked private accounts, and when she opened it, her hands started shaking. Inside were notes in Voss's own handwriting, names of families, dates of complaints or resistance. And next to each name, notations: accelerate repayment timeline, increase interest, call full debt. It was exactly what she'd suspected, proof that Voss was using debt as a weapon, punishing anyone who opposed him. Caleb, she whispered, look at this. He moved beside her, read over her shoulder. This is it. This proves everything. We need to take it. If he notices it's missing, then he'll know someone broke in, and he'll be furious, and it won't matter because we'll have proof of what he's doing. Evelyn grabbed the ledger and several related files. This changes everything. They were almost to the door when they heard footsteps on the stairs. Evelyn froze. Caleb grabbed her arm, pulled her toward the window, but there was nowhere to go. They were on the second floor, and jumping meant broken bones at minimum. The footsteps got closer. Closet, Caleb breathed, and they dove inside just as the office door opened. Through a crack in the closet door, Evelyn could see Pike enter the room. He was carrying a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, humming tunelessly. He set them on the desk, then left without looking around. They waited. Counted to 100, then 200. We need to leave now, Caleb whispered. Before Voss comes up. They slipped out of the closet, out of the office, down the hallway. The stairs seemed impossibly long. Every step was agony. Every second Evelyn expected to hear shouting, to be caught. They reached the kitchen. The back door was right there, 10 feet away. Then the door to the parlor opened and Voss walked into the hallway. Evelyn's breath stopped. She could see him clearly, tall, gray-haired, expensive suit. He was 50 feet away, but in the enclosed space it felt like inches. Voss paused, looking toward the kitchen, looking right at them. Then someone called his name from the parlor, and he turned back, distracted. Caleb grabbed Evelyn's hand and they ran. Out the back door, across the yard, into the darkness. They didn't stop until they reached the horses, and even then Evelyn couldn't catch her breath. "Did he see us?" she gasped. "I don't know. Maybe. I don't know." They rode hard, pushing the horses faster than was safe. The cold was vicious, but Evelyn barely felt it. Adrenaline made everything sharp and immediate and terrifying. They didn't speak until they reached the cabin. Inside, with the door barred and the lamp lit, Evelyn pulled out the stolen ledger and files and spread them on the table. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it." Caleb was shaking, from cold or fear or both. If Voss realizes these are missing, he will. Probably already has. Evelyn started reading through the documents. "But it doesn't matter. Look at this. All of it. Years of manipulation, proof that he's been targeting families for revenge. This is enough to bring him down. If anyone will listen, they'll listen. They have to." Caleb sat down heavily. "You realize what we just did? We committed burglary. If Voss reports it, we're the ones who'll end up in jail. Only if he admits what these documents contain. And if he does that, he's admitting to his own crimes." Evelyn looked up, her eyes bright with something between fear and exhilaration. "Don't you see? He can't report the theft without exposing himself. We've got him trapped. Or he's got us trapped. Either way, we're past the point of backing out." They stayed up the rest of the night going through everything they'd stolen. The ledger was damning, but the accompanying files were worse. Contracts with terms that changed arbitrarily, payment schedules that made no mathematical sense, letters to judges asking for favorable rulings in exchange for political support. It was all there, every piece of the puzzle. As dawn broke, Evelyn looked at Caleb. He looked years older than he had yesterday. Or maybe he looked his actual age for the first time since she'd met him. "We need a lawyer," she said. "Someone who can use this." "Who?" "Anyone local is either working for Voss or terrified of him." "Then we go to Denver, find a territorial prosecutor, someone with actual authority. That's a 3-day ride, in winter." "Then we'd better dress warm." Caleb laughed, exhausted and slightly manic. "You're unbelievable. I'll take that as a compliment. It wasn't meant as one. I'm taking it anyway." They packed that morning, taking only essentials. Food, the stolen documents, enough money for lodging in Denver. Evelyn left a note for Martha, thanking her without saying explicitly what for. They told no one else where they were going or why. Just before they left, Evelyn took one last look at the cabin they'd rebuilt together, the cabin that represented everything they were fighting for. "If this doesn't work," she said quietly, "we lose everything." "I know. And if it does work, Voss will want revenge." "I know that too." She turned to face him. "So why are we doing this?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because you're right. Some things matter more than easy, and you matter more than I thought anyone could." It wasn't a declaration of love. Not quite. But it was close enough that Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "We should go," she said, before she could say something that would make this moment too big to handle. They rode out at noon, heading east toward Denver and whatever waited there. Behind them, the ranch sat quiet. In front of them, 3 days of brutal winter travel and a confrontation with the most powerful man in the territory. Evelyn should have been terrified. Instead, for the first time in her life, she felt powerful. Not because she wasn't scared, but because she'd chosen this. All of it. The danger, the risk, the fight. And nobody, not her father, not Voss, not even Caleb, could take that choice away from her. That was worth more than any amount of safety. The first day of riding was hell. The cold was bad enough, but the horses were struggling through snow that came up past their knees in places, and every mile felt like 10. They stopped only when absolutely necessary, to rest the animals, to eat food that tasted like nothing, to remind their frozen bodies they were still capable of movement. "We should find shelter," Caleb said as the sun started dropping. "There's a way station about 2 miles ahead if it's still standing. And if it's not, then we sleep outside and hope we wake up." The way station was standing, barely. One room with a stone fireplace and a roof that leaked in 3 places. But it was better than nothing, which made it practically luxurious. Evelyn got a fire going while Caleb tended the horses. Her hands were so cold she could barely hold the matches, and it took 6 tries before one actually lit. By the time Caleb came back inside, she had something approximating warmth happening. "How far did we get?" she asked. "Maybe 15 miles? That's all?" "That's all the horses could manage. We push them harder, they'll collapse." He sat down near the fire, his face gray with exhaustion. "We won't make Denver in 3 days at this pace. Maybe 4, maybe 5. "Then that's how long it takes." "Evelyn, if Voss realizes what we took." "He already knows. We've been gone 12 hours. He's definitely noticed." She pulled out some jerky and handed him half. "The question isn't whether he knows. It's whether he can stop us before we reach Denver." They ate in silence, both too tired for conversation. Outside, wind howled. Inside, the fire crackled and popped. Evelyn's ankle, the one she'd twisted weeks ago and insisted was fine, throbbed with each heartbeat. "You're hurting," Caleb said. "I'm fine. You're limping worse than before. It's just the cold making it stiff." He didn't argue, which somehow felt worse than if he had. They both knew she was lying. They both knew the ride was making everything worse, and they both knew they couldn't stop. That night, sharing blankets near the fire because the cold made separation impractical, Caleb said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "That sounds ominous. If this works, if we actually bring Voss down, he's not going to accept it gracefully. Men like him don't." "I know that." "No, I don't think you do. He has money, connections. He could make us disappear and nobody would ask questions, or he could make our lives so miserable we'd wish we'd disappeared." Evelyn shifted to look at him. In the firelight, his face was all shadows and worry. "Are you trying to scare me?" "I'm trying to make sure you understand what we're risking." "I understand perfectly. We're risking everything, but we were going to lose everything anyway. So at least now we're losing it while fighting back." "That's not comforting." "It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be true." She reached out, found his hand in the darkness. "Caleb, I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But I'd rather die trying than live knowing I gave up." "You keep saying that like dying is an acceptable outcome. It's not acceptable, but it's preferable to being powerless." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "When did you get so brave?" "I'm not brave, I'm just tired of being afraid." "That's the same thing." "No, it's not. Brave people aren't scared. I'm terrified every single moment. I just decided being terrified doesn't mean I have to stop." Caleb squeezed her hand gently. "Evelyn Harrow, you're either going to save us or get us killed." "Probably both." He almost smiled. "Yeah, probably both." They reached Denver on the afternoon of the 5th day, half frozen and completely exhausted. The city was bigger than anything Evelyn had seen, buildings 3 stories tall, streets crowded with people, noise and movement everywhere. It felt overwhelming after months of frontier silence. "Where do we find a prosecutor?" Evelyn asked. "Territorial office should be near the courthouse." Caleb looked around, orienting himself. "I was here once, 10 years ago. Everything looks different." They found the courthouse eventually, a stone building that tried very hard to look important. Inside was warmer, at least, and a clerk directed them to the prosecutor's office on the 2nd floor. Nathaniel Pierce was younger than Evelyn expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested he'd heard every lie and excuse humanity could produce. He looked up when they entered, taking in their trail-worn appearance with obvious skepticism. "Help you?" "We need to report corruption," Evelyn said. "Land fraud, debt manipulation, possibly bribery of public officials." Pierce's eyebrows went up. "That's ambitious. Who's the target?" "Gideon Voss." The prosecutor's expression changed. Not quite fear, but definitely caution. "Voss. Of course it's Voss." He leaned back in his chair. "You realize he's one of the wealthiest men in the territory? That he has lawyers who make my salary look like pocket change?" "I realize that. I also have proof of what he's been doing." "Proof." Pierce said it like someone who'd heard that claim before and been disappointed. "What kind of proof?" Evelyn pulled out the ledger and files they'd stolen, laid them on his desk like evidence at trial. His own records, showing years of deliberate debt manipulation, targeting families who opposed him, accelerating payments to force foreclosures, changing contract terms without consent. Pierce picked up the ledger slowly, like it might explode. Started reading. His expression shifted from skeptical to interested to something that might have been actual concern. Where did you get this? Does it matter? Yes. If you stole it, then Voss will have to admit these records exist to prosecute us for theft, which means admitting what they contain. Evelyn leaned forward. You're a prosecutor. You know how this works. These documents are evidence of systematic fraud. Whether we obtained them legally is secondary to what they prove. Pierce kept reading, flipping pages, his jaw getting tighter. This is bad. This is really bad. If even half of this is accurate, it's all accurate. I've talked to the families, verified the patterns. Voss has been doing this for years. Then why hasn't anyone reported it before? Because they're terrified. Because he owns the local judges. Because people who oppose him lose everything. Evelyn's voice was steady, but her hands shook. We're reporting it now because we're going to lose everything anyway. At least this way we fight back. Pierce set down the ledger and looked at them properly. You understand what you're starting? Voss won't take this quietly. He'll fight, and he'll target you specifically. Let him try. That's brave talk from someone who doesn't know what he's capable of. I know exactly what he's capable of. I've watched him destroy families. I've seen how he uses fear as a weapon, but I'm done being afraid of him. The prosecutor studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to Caleb. And you? You're on board with this? She's my wife. Where she goes, I go. Even if it destroys you? We're already being destroyed. At least this way we're causing damage on the way down. Pierce laughed, sharp and humorless. I like you two. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both. He pulled out paper and started taking notes. I'll need statements, detailed ones. Names, dates, amounts. Everything you know about Voss's operations. They spent the next 3 hours going through everything. Evelyn detailed every conversation, every pattern she'd noticed. Caleb provided financial information about their own debt. Together, they built a picture of systematic corruption spanning more than a decade. By the time they finished, Pierce looked genuinely disturbed. This is bigger than I thought, he said. If what you're telling me is accurate, Voss has been operating a territory-wide scheme. We're not talking about aggressive business practices. We're talking about organized fraud. Can you prosecute? Evelyn asked. Maybe, if I can get other families to testify, but that's the problem. Most of them are too scared. Then we convince them. How? By showing them someone's willing to fight, by proving Voss isn't untouchable. Pierce rubbed his face tiredly. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's necessary. They left the courthouse as the sun was setting. Denver felt different now, less overwhelming, more like a place where actual change might be possible. They found a boarding house that charged more than they could afford, and Evelyn didn't care. They had a real bed, actual warmth. For one night, they could pretend they weren't about to go to war with the most powerful man in the territory. Do you think Pierce will actually do something? Caleb asked as they lay in the darkness. I think he wants to. Whether he can is different. If he can't, then we figure out something else. But at least we tried. Caleb rolled over to face her. I need you to know something. Whatever happens, whether we win or lose or end up dead in a ditch, this was worth it. Fighting back was worth it. You sound like you're saying goodbye. I'm saying thank you for not giving up, for being stronger than I am. I'm not stronger. I'm just more stubborn. Same thing. He reached out in the darkness, found her face, traced the line of her jaw. I love you. I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. Evelyn's breath caught. Caleb, you don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know. I do say it back, you idiot. I've been falling in love with you since the day we rebuilt that roof. I just didn't think... She stopped, swallowed. I didn't think I was allowed to. Allowed to? To love someone who married me out of desperation. To want something real from an arrangement that started as pure transaction. He pulled her closer. It stopped being a transaction the moment you hammered that board back on the cabin at 3 a.m. Maybe even before that. They kissed, awkward at first because they were both terrible at this, but then better, urgent, like people who'd been holding back for months and finally stopped pretending. It wasn't particularly graceful. They bumped noses. Someone's elbow ended up somewhere uncomfortable. But it was real, and that mattered more than technique. Later, wrapped around each other under blankets that actually kept them warm, Evelyn said, "If we die doing this, at least we'll die together." That's morbid, but true. Yeah, but true. The next morning, they returned to Pierce's office to find him already at work, papers spread across his desk. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble. "We need to move fast. If Voss realizes you've taken these records to the law, he'll start covering his tracks. We need to file formal charges immediately." "What do you need from us?" Evelyn asked. "More testimony. I need other families willing to go on record. The more witnesses we have, the harder it is for Voss to claim this is just disgruntled debtors lying." "We can get them." "Can you? Because right now you're asking people to risk everything by opposing the most powerful man in the territory. Then we show them they're not alone, that there's actual law on their side for once." Pierce looked doubtful but nodded. "I'll draft the initial complaint. But Evelyn, Mrs. Harrow, you need to understand something. Once I file this, it's public record. Voss will know immediately, and he will retaliate. Let him." "You keep saying that like you're prepared for what it means." "I'm not prepared, but I'm doing it anyway." They spent the next week traveling between Denver and the surrounding ranches, talking to families Voss had crushed. Most were hesitant, some outright refused, but a few, just enough, agreed to testify. Anna and Thomas came first, then Ruth and her husband, even Margaret Holloway, who'd seen Voss destroy too many people to stay silent anymore. "I'll testify," Margaret said. "Someone needs to. Might as well be me." By the end of the week, they had 8 families willing to go on record. 8 families with stories that matched the pattern in Voss's ledger. 8 families brave enough or desperate enough to fight back. Pierce filed the formal complaint on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, half of Denver knew. By evening, word had spread across the territory. Gideon Voss was being charged with fraud, debt manipulation, and conspiracy to commit bribery. "Well," Caleb said when they heard the news had reached Voss, "now it gets interesting." Interesting was an understatement. Within 2 days, Voss's lawyers descended on Denver like locusts. They filed motions to dismiss, challenged the evidence, questioned the witnesses' credibility, claimed the stolen ledger was inadmissible. Pierce fought back with everything he had, but it was clear Voss had resources they couldn't match. "He's trying to bury us in paperwork," Pierce said during one meeting. "If he can delay this long enough, witnesses will back out. Evidence will disappear. He's playing the long game." "Then we don't let him play long," Evelyn said. "We go public. Make this a story people care about." "How?" "Newspapers. Every paper in the territory. We tell them what Voss has been doing. Force him to defend himself publicly, not just in court." Pierce looked uncertain. "That's risky. If we try him in the press before the court, he's already trying us in the press. His lawyers are telling everyone we're liars and thieves. At least if we go public, people will hear our side." They spent the next week giving interviews. Evelyn told her story to anyone who'd listen, how she'd arrived as a mail-order bride, discovered Voss's schemes, decided to fight back. Caleb talked about his father's death and the debt that wouldn't die with him. The other families shared their own stories of manipulation and loss. The newspapers ate it up. Frontier wife battles land baron. Small ranchers fight corrupt empire. David versus Goliath in the Colorado territory. Voss responded with his own press campaign. He called them criminals, said the evidence was fabricated, claimed he was the victim of a conspiracy by debtors who refused to pay what they owed. "We're losing," Caleb said one night, reading the latest editorial that sided with Voss. "He's got better lawyers, more money, and half the territory thinks we're lying." "The other half believes us," Evelyn countered. "That's something. It's not enough. Then we make it enough." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for March 15th. As the date approached, tension built to something almost physical. Evelyn couldn't sleep, could barely eat. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined failure, Voss walking free, them losing everything, all of this being for nothing. "You need to rest," Caleb said the night before the hearing. "I can't. Try anyway. What if we lose? What if Pierce can't make the charges stick? Then we lost fighting. That's more than most people can say." "I don't want to lose fighting. I want to win." "So do I. But wanting doesn't make it happen." Evelyn sat up, her heart racing. I should testify. Tell the judge directly what Voss has been doing. Pierce said that's risky. Voss's lawyers will tear you apart. Let them try. I'm tired of hiding behind procedure. I want to look Voss in the eye and tell him exactly what I think of him. That's emotion, not strategy. Sometimes emotion is strategy. The hearing was held in the largest courtroom in Denver. Every seat was filled. Reporters lined the walls. Evelyn had never seen so many people in one place. Voss sat at the defendant's table, flanked by 3 lawyers who looked like they charged by the second. He was perfectly calm, perfectly composed, like someone who knew the system would protect him. Pierce presented the evidence methodically. The ledger, the testimony of 8 families, documentation of changing contract terms. It was damning, clear, impossible to dismiss. Then Voss's lawyers responded. They attacked everything, said the ledger was stolen property and therefore inadmissible, claimed the witnesses were lying to avoid paying legitimate debts, suggested Pierce was conducting a political witch hunt to advance his career. Your Honor, the lead defense attorney said smoothly, Mr. Voss is a respected businessman who has contributed significantly to the development of this territory. These accusations are nothing more than an attempt by debtors to avoid their legal obligations. Pierce fought back, but Evelyn could see the judge wavering. The defense was good, really good. And Voss sat there looking like someone falsely accused, not someone who'd destroyed families for profit. Your Honor, Evelyn said, standing up without permission. The judge looked startled. Ma'am, you're not— I know I'm not supposed to speak, but I'm going to anyway. She walked forward, ignoring the protests from Voss's lawyers. I'm Evelyn Harrow. I stole that ledger from Mr. Voss's office. It's true. I broke into his house and took his private records. Pierce looked horrified. The defense lawyers looked delighted. But I'm not sorry, Evelyn continued, because those records prove what he's been doing. You want to charge me with theft? Fine, do it. But first you need to look at what I stole and ask why a man with nothing to hide keeps such detailed records of his victims. Mrs. Harrow, the judge started. I'm not finished. I came to this territory as a mail-order bride because my own father saw me as property to be sold. I married a stranger because I had no other options. I've spent months freezing and starving and watching my husband work himself to death, trying to pay a debt that was designed to be unpayable. And when I learned that Voss was doing this deliberately, destroying families for profit, I decided I'd rather be a criminal than let him keep winning. She turned to look at Voss directly. You think you're untouchable. You think money and lawyers make you above the law, but you're not. You're just a man who got rich making other people poor, and I'm not afraid of you anymore. The courtroom was silent. Then Voss smiled, cold and vicious. Your Honor, I think Mrs. Harrow's outburst proves what we've been saying. She's clearly disturbed, desperate, willing to say anything to avoid her husband's legitimate debts. Those debts were manipulated, Evelyn said. You changed the terms after we couldn't pay, the same way you've done with every family who dared to question you. That's a lie. Then explain the ledger. Explain why you have notes next to every family about accelerating their payments or increasing their interest. Explain why every person who spoke against you suddenly found their debt called in early. Voss's smile faded. I don't have to explain anything to you. No. But you do have to explain it to the law. The judge banged his gavel. Enough. Mrs. Harrow, sit down. Mr. Voss, control yourself. He looked at the evidence again, his expression troubled. I'm going to take this under advisement. This hearing is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Pierce grabbed Evelyn's arm. What were you thinking? You just admitted a burglary in open court. I know. Voss's lawyers are going to have you arrested. Let them. But now everyone knows why I did it, and they know Voss couldn't deny what was in that ledger. Caleb pulled her close. You're insane. Everyone keeps saying that, because it keeps being true. That night, word spread through Denver about the hearing. The newspapers ran stories about the mail-order bride who'd confessed to burglary while accusing the territory's richest man of fraud. Opinion was split. Some thought Evelyn was brave, others thought she was delusional. But people were talking, and talk was power. 3 days later, the judge issued his ruling. The case would go to trial. All charges against Voss would be heard by a jury. And while the stolen ledger's admissibility would be determined later, the testimony of the 8 families was enough to proceed. It wasn't a complete victory. But it wasn't a loss either. He didn't dismiss it, Pierce said, looking stunned. I thought for sure he'd throw it out. He couldn't, Evelyn said. Not after everyone heard what was in those documents. Dismissing it would have looked like corruption. So now we go to trial. Now we go to trial. Voss's retaliation came 2 days later. He called in their debt, all of it, immediately. $800 due within 30 days or he'd seize the ranch. He can't do this, Caleb said, reading the notice. He just did. But the trial won't stop him from taking the ranch. Legal and justice are different things. They sat in their boarding house room, both too tired to even feel afraid anymore. We're going to lose everything, Caleb said quietly. Maybe, but we're taking him down with us. That's not much comfort. It's all the comfort we have. The trial was set for April. As the date approached, more families came forward, not just from their territory, but from all over Colorado. Stories of debt manipulation, of homes lost, of lives destroyed. Voss had been running this scheme for 15 years, and the evidence just kept mounting. His lawyers fought viciously. They challenged every witness, questioned every document, made the trial as long and expensive as possible. But Pierce held firm, and the jury listened. On the final day, Evelyn was called to testify. Voss's lead attorney stood up, smiling like a shark. Mrs. Harrow, you've admitted to breaking into my client's home and stealing his property. Is that correct? Yes? And you expect this court to believe that what you stole is legitimate evidence, not fabricated documents you created to frame my client? I didn't fabricate anything. Those records are in Voss's handwriting. They came from his office. So you say, but we only have your word for that. You have the word of 8 families whose experiences match those records exactly. You have a decade of foreclosures that follow the same pattern. You have my testimony and theirs. Evelyn looked at the jury. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to look at the evidence and ask yourselves, does a man with nothing to hide keep such detailed records of how he's ruining people? The attorney tried several more angles, but Evelyn held firm. She'd told the truth. She'd shown the evidence. There was nothing left to do but wait. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the courtroom was packed. On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Evelyn felt her knees buckle. Caleb caught her, held her up. On the charge of debt manipulation, we find the defendant guilty. Voss's face had gone white. On the charge of conspiracy to commit bribery, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom exploded. People shouting, reporters scrambling, Voss's lawyers immediately filing appeals. But it didn't matter. They'd won. Not completely, not permanently. Voss would appeal, would fight, would probably find ways to minimize the damage. But they'd won. 2 weeks later, as part of Voss's sentencing, all his fraudulent debts were declared void, including theirs. The ranch was cleared, free for the first time in a generation. Standing on the porch of the cabin they'd rebuilt together, Evelyn watched the sun set over land that finally belonged to them. We did it, she said quietly. You did it, Caleb corrected. I just tried not to die while you fought. We did it together. He pulled her close, and they stood there in the fading light. 2 people who'd started as strangers and become something neither of them had expected. What now? Caleb asked. Now? Now we live. We build. We do all the things we couldn't do when we were drowning. Sounds boring. After everything we've been through, boring sounds perfect. They went inside as the stars came out, leaving the door open to let in the spring air. And for the first time since Evelyn had arrived in Colorado, the future felt like something other than a threat. It felt like possibility. Winning didn't feel the way Evelyn thought it would. She'd imagined relief, maybe joy, the sense of a weight lifting. Instead, she felt exhausted down to her bones and vaguely suspicious that someone would show up any moment to tell them it had all been a mistake. They returned to the ranch in late April to find spring attempting to happen. The snow was melting, leaving behind mud and the kind of mess that suggested winter had been holding the land hostage for months. The cabin stood exactly as they'd left it, which felt like a minor miracle given everything that had happened. Home, Caleb said, dismounting. Evelyn looked at the cabin, the barn, the land stretching in every direction. Home, she agreed, though the word still felt foreign in her mouth. The first week back was strange. They kept expecting something terrible to happen. Another storm, another crisis, Pike showing up with new threats. But nothing did. The days were just days. Work that needed doing, repairs that could wait, time that belonged to them instead of to survival. I don't know what to do with this, Evelyn admitted one morning, drinking coffee on the porch while the sun came up. With what? Peace, quiet, the absence of constant disaster. Caleb laughed. You could try enjoying it. I don't know how. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. The other families started visiting once word spread that they were back. Anna came first, bringing bread she'd baked and tears she'd been holding in since the verdict. You did it, she said, hugging Evelyn so hard it hurt. You actually did it. We did it, Evelyn corrected. Everyone who testified, everyone who fought back. But you started it. You were the one brave enough to steal those records. I was desperate enough. There's a difference. Is there? Anna pulled back, studying her. Because from where I'm standing, desperate and brave look pretty similar. Ruth came next, then Margaret, then families Evelyn barely knew, but who'd heard about the trial and wanted to thank her personally. Each visit was awkward in its own way. She'd never been good at accepting gratitude. But underneath the discomfort was something else. Connection, community. The sense that they'd all survived something together and come out changed. You're a hero, one woman said. I'm not. I'm just someone who got angry and did something stupid about it. That's what heroes are. People too angry or stubborn to accept the way things are. After everyone left, Evelyn sat at the table and tried to process the idea that she might be someone people looked up to. It felt ridiculous. She was still the same person who'd arrived on that wagon 6 months ago, thin, scared, with no idea how to survive frontier life. Except she wasn't that person anymore. That person would never have broken into Voss's house, would never have stood in a courtroom and admitted to burglary, would never have fought a man with 10 times her resources and actually won. You're thinking too much, Caleb said from the doorway. I'm trying to figure out who I am now. You're Evelyn Harrow, wife, rancher, burglar, hero, take your pick. I don't feel like any of those things. Nobody feels like what they are. We just do things and hope they add up to something worth calling an identity. He sat down across from her. You want to know what I think? Not really, but you're going to tell me anyway. I think you spent your whole life being told you were weak and powerless and not worth much. And then you got here and discovered that was all lies. You're not weak. You're terrifying. You're the strongest person I've ever met, and I'm including my father in that assessment. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. Your father worked himself to death for this place. Exactly. He couldn't let go. Couldn't ask for help. Couldn't admit when he was beaten. You did all three and still won. That takes strength he never had. I asked for help because I had no choice. Everyone has a choice. You chose to trust people, chose to believe we could win, chose to keep fighting when every rational person would have given up. He reached across the table, took her hand. That's not weakness. That's the opposite of weakness. She squeezed his fingers, unable to find words adequate to what she was feeling. So instead she said, we should plant something in the garden plot. I saw some seed packets in town. Changing the subject? Aggressively. He smiled. All right, we'll plant things. See if we can grow something that doesn't require breaking and entering to obtain. They spent the next month rebuilding in ways that had nothing to do with roofs or walls. They planted a garden, beans and carrots and potatoes, optimistic vegetables that might actually survive the Colorado climate. They repaired fences that had been neglected during the winter. They sold some of the furs Caleb had trapped, and for once the money went toward things they wanted instead of debts they owed. It felt strange. Good, but strange. One afternoon, while Evelyn was weeding the garden and Caleb was fixing a gate that had decided to fall apart, a rider appeared. Not Pike this time. Someone Evelyn didn't recognize. Help you? Caleb called, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle he now kept within reach. The rider dismounted. He was young, maybe 25, with an earnest face that suggested he hadn't yet learned to be cynical about humanity. I'm looking for Mrs. Evelyn Harrow. That's me. Evelyn stood, wiping dirt from her hands. My name's Daniel Chen. My family used to own a ranch about 40 miles north until Voss took it 3 years ago. He pulled an envelope from his coat. I wanted to give you this personally. Evelyn opened it to find money. A lot of money, more than she'd seen in one place in her entire life. What is this? Restitution. After the trial, Voss's assets were seized and distributed to the families he'd defrauded. This is your portion. There's more coming. The legal process takes time. But this is the first payment. Evelyn stared at the money like it might bite her. How much is this? $300. The rest will come over the next year as Voss's properties are sold and debt settled. $300. Enough to buy livestock, repair equipment, save for emergencies. Actually build a life instead of just surviving one. I don't know what to say, she managed. You don't have to say anything. You gave us our lives back. This is just money. Daniel tipped his hat. My family wanted me to tell you that if you ever need anything, help with harvest, supplies, whatever, you just ask. We owe you more than we can repay. After he left, Evelyn and Caleb sat on the porch and looked at the money spread between them. This changes things, Caleb said quietly. Does it? We can actually plan now, not just react to disasters. We can build something real. Evelyn thought about that, about the difference between surviving and living. What do you want to build? Honestly, I don't know. I've spent so long just trying not to lose everything that I never thought about what I'd do if I actually won. He looked at her. What do you want? She considered the question seriously. What did she want? 6 months ago, the answer would have been simple, not to be her father's problem anymore. But now, I want a home, she said finally. Not just a cabin that keeps the cold out, an actual home where we're not scared all the time, where we can have people over without being embarrassed about how little we have, where maybe someday... She stopped, suddenly self-conscious. Where maybe someday what? Where maybe someday there could be children who grow up feeling safe, who don't spend their whole childhood afraid of losing everything. Caleb's expression softened. That sounds like a good thing to build. It's a long-term project. The best things usually are. They used part of the money to buy lumber, real lumber, not salvaged scraps, and spent the summer expanding the cabin. Added a second room, fixed the porch properly, built furniture that didn't wobble. It was slow work, and neither of them were particularly skilled carpenters, but they learned. Other families helped. Ruth and her husband came to raise the new walls. Anna brought her children to help paint. Even Margaret showed up with supplies and unsolicited advice about everything they were doing wrong. You're building the door frame backwards, she said, watching Caleb struggle with measurements. I'm aware of that now, thank you. Want help? From you? Always. By August, the cabin was transformed. Still small, still rough around the edges, but solid, warm, home. Evelyn stood in the new room, their bedroom, finally separate from the kitchen and living space, and tried to remember what the place had looked like when she'd first arrived. That leaning, desperate structure felt like something from another life. What are you thinking? Caleb asked, coming up behind her. That I can't believe this is real. That someone's going to show up and tell me it was all temporary. It's real, and it's permanent, or as permanent as anything gets. She turned to face him. I never thanked you properly. For what? For not being like my father. For treating me like a partner instead of property. For giving me space to become someone I actually wanted to be. Evelyn, you became that person on your own. I just tried not to get in your way. You did more than that. You believed in me when I barely believed in myself. He pulled her close, and they stood there in the empty room that would become their actual bedroom, not just a place where they slept in shifts, but a shared space that represented something neither of them had dared to hope for. I love you, she said. I know I said it before, but I'm saying it again. I love you, and I'm grateful every single day that I got off that wagon and didn't run. I love you too, even though you're completely insane and nearly got us both killed multiple times, especially because of that. Yeah, especially because of that. That night, lying in their new bed in their new room, Evelyn thought about the journey that had brought her here. From Ohio to Colorado, from powerless to powerful, from afraid to angry to something that might have been actual happiness. It hadn't been smooth. Nothing about their story was smooth. They'd fought and struggled and nearly lost everything multiple times. They'd broken laws and taken risks that should have destroyed them. They'd faced down a man who had every advantage and somehow came out winning. but they'd done it together. And that made all the difference. Fall came, and with it the harvest from their small garden. It wasn't much, some vegetables, a few potatoes that were more optimism than substance, but it was something they'd grown themselves, proof that the land could give instead of just taking. They started planning for winter, not with the desperation of last year, but with actual preparation. They had money now, supplies, wood stacked properly, food that wasn't just beans and questionable salt pork. "We're going to be fine," Caleb said one evening, taking inventory. "Don't say that. You'll jinx it." "I'm not jinxing anything. I'm stating facts. We have resources. We have community. We have each other. That's more than fine. That's actually good." Evelyn wanted to argue, but she couldn't. He was right. They were fine, better than fine. They were building a life that belonged to them instead of to fear or debt or Gideon Voss. In November, news came that Voss had died. Heart attack, they said, though some people whispered it was the stress of losing everything. His empire had been dismantled piece by piece, properties sold, assets distributed. The judges he'd bribed were removed from office. The corrupt system he'd built was being torn down. "How do you feel about it?" Caleb asked when they heard. "I don't know. I wanted him to face consequences, not die." "He did face consequences, just not the ones you wanted. Is that enough?" "It has to be. We don't get to control how justice happens, just whether we fight for it." Evelyn thought about that, about Voss dying alone, his legacy destroyed, everything he'd built collapsing around him. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined, but maybe it was the one that mattered. "I'm not sorry he's gone," she said finally, "but I'm not celebrating either. I'm just done. Done being angry at him. Done letting him take up space in my head." "That sounds healthy." "It sounds exhausting, but necessary." Winter came, but this time they were ready. The cabin was warm. The food was plentiful. The animals were fed and healthy. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking about plans for spring, about expanding the ranch, about building something that could last. "Do you ever miss Ohio?" Caleb asked one night. "Not even a little bit. Do you ever regret posting that ad?" "Every day." She punched his arm. "Liar." "All right, fine. Not every day, just the days when you do something terrifying, and I remember I'm married to someone with no sense of self-preservation." "You love that about me." "I do." "Which says disturbing things about my judgment." She laughed, and the sound filled the cabin with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Spring returned, and with it came the proof that they'd survived. Not just survived, thrived. The garden they planted was bigger this year. They bought 2 more horses, started talking about cattle, made plans that extended months and years into the future instead of just days. Other families were recovering too. Anna and Thomas had paid off their remaining debts and were planning to expand their own ranch. Ruth had started a cooperative where ranch wives shared supplies and labor. The community that Voss had tried to crush was rebuilding stronger than before. "It's because of you," Margaret said one afternoon, visiting with supplies for a quilting circle that had somehow become a regular thing. "You showed everyone that fighting back was possible. It wasn't just me." "It started with you. Don't diminish that." Evelyn still struggled with being called a hero. But she was learning to accept that maybe heroism wasn't about being fearless. Maybe it was about being terrified and doing the necessary thing anyway. About choosing to fight even when losing seemed inevitable. About refusing to accept powerlessness as a permanent condition. One evening in May, exactly 1 year after she'd arrived in Colorado, Evelyn and Caleb stood on their porch and watched the sun set over land that finally felt like theirs. "A year ago, I was getting off a wagon and wondering if I'd survive a week," Evelyn said. "And now? Now I'm wondering what we'll build next." Caleb put his arm around her waist. "Whatever it is, we'll build it together. That's the only way I know how to do things anymore." They stood there as darkness fell, 2 people who'd started as strangers, bound by desperation, and become something neither of them had known they needed. Partners, equals, people who'd fought for each other and won. The frontier was still hard. The land was still unforgiving. Winter would still be brutal, and there would always be challenges they couldn't predict. But they'd learned something important during their fight against Voss. They'd learned that powerlessness was often a lie people told you to keep you from fighting back. That courage didn't mean being unafraid. It meant being afraid and choosing to act anyway. That sometimes the most radical thing you could do was refuse to accept that things had to stay the way they were. Evelyn had arrived in Colorado as someone's unwanted daughter, traded away like property because her father saw her as a burden. She'd been thin, scared, convinced she was too weak to survive frontier life. She'd been wrong about almost everything. She wasn't weak. She'd never been weak. She'd just been surrounded by people who needed her to believe she was powerless so they could maintain control. Out here, on land that demanded strength just to survive, she'd discovered what she was actually capable of, and it turned out she was capable of quite a lot. "Evelyn," Caleb said quietly. "Yeah, thank you." "For what?" "For not running, for staying, for fighting, for being exactly who you are." She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of another person who'd chosen to stand with her instead of against her. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stay." "You gave yourself that reason? I just tried to keep up." They went inside as the stars came out, closing the door on another day that belonged to them. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more opportunities to either give up or keep fighting. But Evelyn wasn't worried. She'd learned something important over the past year. She was a lot harder to break than anyone, including herself, had ever suspected. The girl who'd stepped off that wagon wouldn't have survived. But that girl didn't exist anymore. In her place was a woman who'd stared down one of the most powerful men in the territory and won. Who'd broken laws and risked everything because doing nothing felt worse than any possible consequence. Who'd built a home and a life out of desperation and determination and sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. That woman could handle whatever came next. That woman was stronger than fear, more stubborn than circumstance, and absolutely done with being underestimated. That woman was Evelyn Harrow, and she'd just gotten started.
Yeah, I completely understand. Kara was playing Palia, but I need to read and run because okay, no worries. Thank you for coming in. Let me give you a shout out. Also, let me make sure I'm following you. All right, now I'll make sure to be able to check out your streams soon. Thank you for coming in and bringing your community over. Oh, thank you for the follow, Reaper. Thank you so much. Oh, you do variety streaming. Okay. Hell yeah. Oh, that's awesome. All right. I'll have to check your stream out soon. I love the Asian markets for things like duck and rabbit. So much less expensive. Yeah. Oh, I bet. Oh, 100%. I'm getting back to regular streams. Oh, hell yeah. That's awesome. Well, I was taking a break for like the last week. I was not feeling so great, but that's how life is, Sometimes we got to take a break, but I hope you feel better soon. And yeah, everybody, please give Kara a follow if you're not already following them. Yeah, Asian markets are amazing also for seafood as well and produce. Produce in general, produce is just fucking amazing at Asian markets, I found. Also going to my like local like East Asian, specifically East Asian markets. What I mean. Mostly right now it's games D&D and some Diamond Art. Oh, nice. That's awesome. Well, hopefully you can catch one of your streams, of course. I've dabbled a little bit in D&D, but in not a hot second. I have not tried diamond painting yet. But diamond painting does look like a lot of fun if I was not someone who would indeed probably flip all of the different pieces into midair is what I would imagine myself doing. But yeah, tonight, for folks that are new here, we're working on a beanie right now in the round. We worked on the pearl, like knit pearl one, And now we're working on the knit row. And then we're going to switch over to purl 1, knit 1 for the following for 2 inches. And then we're going to work just a knit stitch for the rest of the beanie. Hello, Canvas monsters. How's it going? Welcome in. Really want to try diamond painting as well, but I don't know if my hands are up to it after whatever happened this spring. There's some nerve damage, so I have to rethink every. Oh yeah, that's valid.